Picture this: London, 1979. The Conservative Party rides a wave of sharp, flinty optimism under Margaret Thatcher, and you watch Jeffrey Archer glide across that world with a grin bright enough to catch every TV light. He's a familiar face already: fundraiser, raconteur, headline maker, someone who moves easily between donor dinners and BBC green rooms. On paper, it is an ascent, but you're listening with future knowledge, and the future is unforgiving. In 2001, at the Old Bailey, Archer will be convicted of perjury and perverting the course of justice, sent to prison. His earlier 1987 libel victory turned, in hindsight, into Exhibit A for collapse. That's the paradox you carry into tonight's story. Welcome to 102 Hours. Settle in. Let Westminster's noise dim to a soft hum while the city outside slides toward midnight. If you're awake with me, drop your location and local time in the comments. It's oddly soothing to see our map of night owls appear. And while you're here, a gentle nudge to like and subscribe. It keeps these late-night deep dives alive. We'll keep the tone calm, the pace unhurried, the details precise. Because with Archer, the details will matter. You rewind to the start. Archer is born in 1940, and by the late 1960s he's already orbiting politics. The mainstream fact to hang your hat on: at just 29, in 1969, he becomes Conservative MP for Louth, one of the youngest faces on the Commons benches. The chamber is a brass and leather theater, and Archer seems built for theater. Quick with a quip, photogenic, agile with a soundbite. Colleagues murmur that he's a natural networker. Journalists learn he returns calls faster than most ministers. But Parliament is only one pillar of the persona. There's also an early career quirk, the tidbit people love to trade at dinner parties, that he once worked as a physical education instructor in his younger days. The image is almost comic: the future lord with a whistle, calling for one more lap. It feeds a tidy myth about discipline, stamina, get-it-done energy. Later, that myth will collide with the legal record. For now, it plays well. You watch ambition stretch in two directions at once. On the one hand, policy and party loyalty. On the other, reputation and reach. Even before the 1980s glamour years, Archer is building a second power base: publishing, broadcasting, the soft empire of fame that seeps into households more efficiently than speeches ever can. He learns that a warm radio anecdote can do what a committee speech cannot: make strangers feel they know him. The 1970s are rough country for conservatives and not much kinder to Archer. 1974 is the year everything tilts. His finances implode after a disastrous investment. Embarrassment presses in from all sides, and he resigns his seat, a spectacular reverse thrust for a rising man. This isn't tea scandal in the moral sense, no courtroom yet, but it is a public stumble that would have ended other careers. Archer instead pivots. He writes. 1976 brings Not a Penny More, Not a Penny Less, a revenge-tinted caper that reads to many, like wish fulfillment transmuted into paperback. It sells. Then he writes again, and again. The novelist-politician identity fuses in the public imagination. The Tory with cliffhanger chapters, the fundraiser with blurbs from famous names. By the mid-1980s, Archer is back near the summit of party machinery. The mainstream marker, in 1985 he becomes deputy chairman of the Conservative Party. He's everywhere: auctions, telethons, conference platforms. He can work a room in 10 minutes and leave it 2 degrees warmer. To donors, he's a sure bet. To the press office, he's a one-man content mill. To rivals, he's a comet you can admire from the ground or resent from the shade. But comets burn hot. 1986 arrives with a tabloid allegation about a sex worker, a bundle of claims Archer calls lies. He sues for libel, and in 1987 he wins in spectacular fashion: $500,000 in damages and a tableau of public vindication. The applause is thunderous. The victory photo, Mary Archer beside him, poised and loyal, plays on the front pages like absolution. You slow your breathing and notice how neatly the narrative aligns. Youthful rise, financial fall, literary rescue, political rebirth, courtroom triumph. It's the sort of arc that seduces an audience into closure. Case closed, reputations restored, onward to bigger stages. But even in this first section, you're careful not to mistake structure for truth. Investigators still question whether the apparent order of Archer's rise concealed habits of performance, of selective memory, that would later prove fatal in a witness box. It's not a verdict. It's a caution to you, the late-night listener. Some stories age into something else when new facts walk on stage. You scan the 1980s for hints. Archer's charisma is not just surface. There is a real talent in it. The talent of reframing scenes so deftly that audiences forget what they came in thinking. That strength will serve him brilliantly at book launches and disastrously under oath. He is tireless, he is canny, and he has an instinct for which details to polish and which to bury in footnotes no one reads. There's a fringish tidbit people pass around, that Archer times his writing days in 2-hour bursts with sharpened pencils, a ritual he will sometimes demonstrate for journalists with a showman's flourish. If you're generous, you call it discipline. If you're wary, you call it choreography. Either way, it is brand building, and brand building is power. By the late 1980s, Archer's proximity to Thatcher's project adds a golden frame to the portrait. He isn't a cabinet minister drafting white papers, but he is a force multiplier. He raises money, stokes morale, warms microphones. Politics is a supply chain of attention, and Archer supplies attention on tap. The background hum, though, is never entirely quiet. Whisper networks remember financial chaos in the 1970s. They remember the Old Bailey is a place where stories can be retold with evidence. None of that matters until it suddenly, violently does. For now, you end the opening movement where triumph is still uninterrupted. Archer strides down courthouse steps in 1987 as a man the law has kissed on the forehead. Reporters jostle. The summer light does that flattering, forgiving thing to his smile. If the story ended here, it would be a parable about grit and gifted public relations. It does not end here. You angle the lamp a little lower and let the ASMR hush settle in. From this height, the drop will be long. And when it comes, it won't be an ordinary fall. It will be a collapse engineered by the very narrative choices that once kept him aloft. That's why this case matters, and why, as you listen in the dark, you'll find the beats familiar and the consequences bracing. Close your eyes and imagine the year is 1974. Britain is in the middle of an energy crisis. The lights literally going out in homes during rolling blackouts. Inflation gnaws at wages, and business ventures collapse like dominoes. In the middle of it all, you picture Jeffrey Archer, just 34 years old, still carrying himself like the rising star of the conservative benches, trying to look calm as the floor gives way beneath him. Because behind the confident speeches and the carefully chosen suits, he had made a disastrous financial gamble. The company was called Aquablast. On paper, it looked like the future, a Toronto-based scheme dealing with industrial cleaning technology, the kind of innovation that promised big returns at a time when Britain craved fresh enterprise. Archer had sunk money into it, more than he could reasonably afford. In politics, people whispered that he had the instincts of a salesman, always chasing the next big thing. This, however, wasn't a success story. It was a trap. When Aquablast collapsed, Archer was left staring at debts that spiraled toward £500,000. In the mid-1970s, that wasn't just ruinous. It was almost unthinkable. For a sitting member of parliament, it carried humiliation. Imagine yourself in his shoes. One day shaking hands at receptions, the next day realizing you can't pay your bills, and creditors are circling like hawks. The press caught wind quickly. They loved the irony. The golden boy of Weston-super-Mare undone by a foreign cleaning venture with a flashy name. The British tabloids even then sharpened their pens with delight. If you were reading those headlines in 1974, you would have seen words like disgrace, collapse, and humiliation sitting uncomfortably close to Jeffrey Archer's name. Mainstream accounts say that Archer was nearly bankrupt. He sold his house, scrambled to meet obligations, and watched as his once glittering future shrank into survival mode. There's a painful practicality in politics. MPs are meant to appear financially sound, the picture of responsibility. And here was Archer, exposed as someone who couldn't even manage his own investments. That year, he resigned from Parliament. The explanation offered was health, but everyone knew the real reason: debt, embarrassment, the simple fact that he couldn't afford to remain. You can imagine the silence of that resignation letter, the ink drying on a page that marked the end of his political dream, at least for the time being. And yet, the story didn't stop there. Archer had a remarkable instinct for turning setbacks into stepping stones. If politics was closed off for now, then he would write. He had the energy, the showmanship, and, crucially, the need for money. He began to craft what would become his second act. The novelist who could spin page-turning tales of ambition, betrayal, and improbable success. But before the books and the fame, there's a quirky detail worth pausing on. Around this time, Archer briefly tried to supplement his income by selling artwork on the streets of London. Picture him, sharply dressed but financially ruined, hawking pieces in Chelsea as if charm alone could keep the creditors at bay. It sounds absurd, almost comedic, but it's also revealing. Even stripped of position, Archer couldn't let go of performance. Everything he did, even selling paintings, was done as though the world was still watching. Investigators still question whether those years of financial collapse hardened him, or simply taught him that with enough creativity, even the ugliest truth could be rewritten. After all, when you've stared at bankruptcy and survived, you start to believe in your own resilience, or perhaps your own ability to bend reality. By the mid-1970s, Archer was effectively out of politics, his name stained, his prospects uncertain. But instead of fading quietly into obscurity, he began the slow, surprising pivot that would one day return him to both fame and scandal. Because if there's one constant in the story of Jeffrey Archer, it's this: just when you think he's finished, he finds another way back into the light. So, as you sit with the image of him in 1974, a man caught between disgrace and reinvention, you sense the rhythm of his life beginning to form. Rise, collapse, reinvention. The first fall is never the last. Picture a man in the mid-1970s who has lost almost everything: his parliamentary seat, his financial credibility, and much of his public standing. He's living with the humiliation of near bankruptcy, the taste of failure bitter on his tongue. And yet, rather than sinking into obscurity, he sits down at a desk with nothing more than pen, paper, and determination. That man is Jeffrey Archer, and as you lean closer to his story, you discover something remarkable. He is about to transform ruin into reinvention, politics into literature, debt into millions. The first book was Not a Penny More, Not a Penny Less, published in 1976. If you hold the paperback in your hands, you'd see the title alone seems almost like a private joke, a cheeky nod to his own recent financial collapse. The plot followed four men who lose money in a shady investment scheme and then concoct an elaborate plan to win it back from the swindler. You don't need to squint very hard to see Archer himself in those pages. He was writing his own story, only dressing it up with capers, cleverness, and revenge. Mainstream accounts confirm that the book was modestly successful, not a runaway hit, but enough to pull him out of the worst of his debts. And here you see Archer discovering something new. He had the gift of storytelling, not in the dry policy debates of Westminster, but in page-turning fiction that ordinary readers devoured. For someone who had once sold paintings on the street to survive, this was salvation. By the late 1970s and early 1980s, Archer's reputation as a novelist grew. His breakout came with Cain and Abel in 1979, a sweeping saga of two men born on the same day, one poor, one privileged, their lives colliding in rivalry and ambition. The book sold by the millions worldwide. Suddenly, Jeffrey Archer wasn't the disgraced ex-MP anymore. He was the best-selling storyteller whose novels filled airport bookshops and climbed international charts. You can almost feel the whiplash. One moment, humiliation in Parliament; the next, international acclaim as a novelist. It's the kind of reinvention most people only dream about, and Archer reveled in it. He toured, gave interviews, soaked up praise. Readers adored his rags-to-riches plots, and, perhaps most importantly, the money was flowing again. There's a quirky tidbit tucked into this period. Archer once bragged that he could finish a novel draft in just 3 weeks if he pushed himself hard enough. He would later describe his writing routine with military precision. Up at 5 a.m., writing in 2-hour bursts throughout the day, always finishing a chapter before stopping. For someone once accused of being careless with the truth, he was astonishingly disciplined with fiction. Investigators still question whether Archer's storytelling success was pure literary talent, or whether it was another example of his uncanny knack for selling himself, shaping perception, and turning narrative into profit. After all, Cain and Abel wasn't just a book. It was a new mask, one that made people forget, at least temporarily, about Aquablast and bankruptcy. By the mid-1980s, Archer's bank account was healthy again, his fame restored. He began moving back into the social and political circles he had once abandoned. At parties, you don't see him shaking hands not only as a writer, but as a man who might once again belong in the corridors of power. His wife, Mary, already a respected scientist, lent him credibility and stability. Together, they cut an elegant figure, almost as though the mess of the 1970s had never happened. This return through literature gave Archer something priceless: a second chance. He was no longer just a failed MP. He was Lord Jeffrey Archer in waiting, the writer who could stand shoulder to shoulder with Britain's elite, admired not for votes won, but for books sold. And yet, as you trace this chapter of his life, you sense the familiar rhythm. Success that feels almost too good, too shiny, as though scandal is waiting just beyond the corner. So, as you picture him at his desk, scribbling fast, or smiling at book signings with lines of eager readers, remember this: Jeffrey Archer had already taught himself once that collapse can be followed by reinvention. But reinvention, in his story, always seemed to come at a price. It's the summer of 1986, and Britain is buzzing with Thatcherite confidence, stock markets humming, tabloids screaming with gossip. You pick up the News of the World, a paper never shy about a juicy headline, and there it is in thick, inky letters: Jeffrey Archer, rising political figure and best-selling author, accused of paying a prostitute for sex. The woman at the heart of it is Monica Coughlin, a Manchester-based sex worker. Suddenly, Archer's reinvention as a respectable public figure is under siege. Imagine you're Archer, reading that headline for the first time. You've worked for years to claw your way back from disgrace, to trade bankruptcy for book tours, to become not just solvent, but celebrated. And now, with one accusation, the tabloids threaten to tear it all away. You feel the floor tilt again, and instinctively, you prepare for battle. Mainstream accounts say the allegation first broke in the News of the World, then quickly spread. The Daily Star picked it up in October, running its own sensational story that Archer had handed Monica Coughlin $2,000 to leave the country. For a politician, that wasn't just embarrassing, it was political dynamite. For Archer, it was existential. His carefully rebuilt public image was under assault. You can almost hear the conversations at Conservative Party headquarters. Is it true? Could it sink us? At this time, Archer was deputy chairman of the Conservative Party. That role made him a valuable figure in Tory strategy, a fundraiser, and a loyal Thatcher supporter. And in politics, loyalty buys you protection, but only if you fight back convincingly. Archer denied the allegations flatly, and he went further. He sued the Daily Star for libel. That was a high-stakes gamble. A libel suit meant he wasn't simply saying, "I didn't do it." He was demanding a court formally declare the paper had lied. In Britain, libel laws traditionally favored plaintiffs, but only if they told the truth. If Archer was hiding something, this move could backfire spectacularly, and yet his confidence was unshakable. You picture him walking into legal meetings, chin raised, voice calm, insisting he would clear his name. The party, for the moment, stood behind him. Margaret Thatcher herself continued to back Archer, a sign of how central he had become to the Conservative machine. Here was a quirky tidbit from this scandal in his early days. Archer, U.S. allies once joked that he had 9 lives like a cat, always bouncing back no matter what the press hurled at him. When the Daily Star printed the story, one aide reportedly remarked, "Well, there goes life number 3. It was dark humor, but it captured the sense that Archer's career was a perpetual tightrope walk over scandal. Investigators still question whether Archer's decision to sue was the move of an innocent man, wrongly accused, or the bravado of someone convinced he could bend the courtroom to his will just as he bent public perception. The trial would not come until the following year. But in 1986, as newspapers ran wild and political opponents whispered, you can sense the tension building. Would Archer weather the storm as he had before, emerging unscathed? Or would this be the scandal that finally ended him? For now, the stage was set. Jeffrey Archer versus the tabloid press, a courtroom drama that would grip Britain. And as you drift into the story's rhythm, you realize, the more he tried to control his image, the more explosive the fallout would eventually become. It's July 1987, and the Old Bailey courtroom hums with anticipation. Wooden benches creak as reporters shift their weight, pens poised, ready to capture the outcome of one of Britain's most sensational libel cases. You sit quietly, absorbing the atmosphere, polished oak, echoing footsteps, the faint scratch of nibs against notepads. At the center of it all, Jeffrey Archer. Politician, novelist, scandal magnate. On trial, not for a crime, but for his reputation. The Daily Star had accused him of paying Monica Coughlin, a sex worker, $2,000 to leave the country and bury a scandal. Archer swore it wasn't true. And here he was, betting his entire future on a jury believing him. In a way, this wasn't just a trial, it was theater, with Archer in the starring role. Day after day, the courtroom buzzed with witnesses, counterclaims, legal fireworks. Archer's legal team portrayed him as a man of principle, cruelly maligned by a reckless tabloid. Monica Coughlin, dignified but under immense pressure, held her ground as best she could. And still, Archer's confidence never seemed to crack. He smiled for cameras outside, looked composed within, and spun his answers with the practiced ease of a man who had survived Parliament and bestseller lists alike. Mainstream reports recall that Archer delivered a stirring performance in the witness box. He was witty, sharp, almost charming, playing to the jury with the same instinct that had once won over readers. His wife, Mary Archer, stood steadfast by his side, an image of grace and loyalty. To the public, that image mattered. If Mary believed him, many reasoned, perhaps he was innocent after all. And then came the verdict. Archer had won. The jury found in his favor. He was awarded $500,000 in damages. A staggering sum in the 1980s, enough to both punish the Daily Star and vindicate him in the eyes of supporters. For Jeffrey Archer, it was triumph. You can almost hear the celebratory hum in Conservative headquarters, the sigh of relief in his own household. He had stared down the tabloids and emerged victorious. Outside the court, cameras flashed as Archer addressed the press with practiced gravitas. He declared his innocence, thanked his wife, and reminded the world that truth had prevailed. For many observers, it looked like the end of the scandal, a dramatic full stop. The politician-novelist had been vindicated. His star, once again, seemed to be rising. Here's a quirky detail. Archer, never one to miss a good anecdote, reportedly said later that he celebrated the verdict with champagne, but only after ensuring Mary had the first sip. A small flourish, but perfectly in character. Archer knew that even in victory, symbolism mattered. Investigators still question whether that courtroom win was genuine justice or the result of Archer Ashe's extraordinary ability to charm juries, friends, and colleagues alike. With hindsight, you know the victory was hollow, the foundation cracked. But in that moment, in 1987, it looked like redemption. The verdict boosted his standing in politics. He became a household name not just as a novelist, but as a man who had fought the press and won. The Conservative Party, ever pragmatic, saw him as both useful and resilient. His finances were secure, his reputation, on the surface, restored, and his ambitions rekindled. And yet, as you lean into the rhythm of this story, you sense something uneasy beneath the surface. Because the evidence that would one day unravel everything, the diary entries, the false alibi, the lies carefully sown, was already in motion. Archer had won the battle, yes, but he had set himself up for a far more devastating war. For now, though, the picture is clear. Jeffrey Archer walking down the courthouse steps, reporters jostling, Mary at his side, the summer light gleaming on his smile. A man who, once again, had defied ruin. A man who, for the moment, seemed untouchable. Picture London in 1999. Red buses crawling through rain-glazed streets, Millennium Dome rising awkwardly on the Greenwich Peninsula, and political posters beginning to appear on lampposts. A new office, the Mayor of London, is about to be created, and suddenly the capital feels like a stage set for political reinvention. Into this spotlight steps Jeffrey Archer, novelist, lord, former scandal survivor. To many, his candidacy feels like the perfect story arc. The man who had fallen, rebuilt himself, and was now ready to lead the city into the new millennium. The Conservative Party embraced his ambition. Archer had charisma, name recognition, and a flair for campaigning that made headlines. Imagine his voice booming through packed halls, telling supporters that he alone had the vision to restore London's greatness. His books still sold by the millions. His face was recognizable even to those who didn't follow politics. For a while, it looked as though Jeffrey Archer might become not just a figure of redemption, but the first mayor of London. And then, almost predictably, the shadows caught up. In November 1999, new allegations surfaced. This time, they weren't whispers in tabloids, but devastating revelations from within Archer's own circle. A close associate, Ted Francis, claimed that Archer had fabricated an alibi during his 1987 libel case. The diary he'd once presented in court, the evidence that had helped him win £500,000, was not authentic. The story landed like a bomb. You can imagine the silence in Tory headquarters as papers rolled off the presses, splashing Archer's face across front pages with words like liar and fraud. For the Conservative leadership, this was more than embarrassment. They were already struggling under the weight of Labour's dominance, and the idea of sending Archer into battle now felt toxic. Within days, William Hague, then party leader, forced Archer to withdraw as the mayoral candidate. One moment, Archer was a contender. The next, he was politically radioactive. You can picture him at the press conference, shoulders tense, voice carefully modulated, declaring he was stepping aside for the good of the party. But the mask couldn't fully hide the humiliation. He had been on the brink of political resurrection, only to be undone by the ghosts of his own past. Here is a quirky tidbit. Archer reportedly kept an actual Mayor of London campaign mug on his desk long after his candidacy imploded. Whether out of irony, stubbornness, or simple ego, he refused to let go of the souvenir from the campaign that never was. Investigators still question whether Archer believed, deep down, that his earlier lies would never catch up with him. After all, he had beaten the tabloids, charmed juries, and rebuilt his career before. Perhaps he assumed he could always outpace scandal. But in 1999, the pace changed. The law was catching up, and this time the Conservative Party was unwilling to protect him. The fallout was brutal. Expelled from the campaign, Archer watched as his rivals seized the spotlight. Labor's Ken Livingstone eventually won the mayoralty, while Archer's name became synonymous not with leadership but with deception. His enemies crowed, his allies fell silent, and his family braced for impact. And impact was coming, because the collapse of his mayoral dream wasn't quite the end of the scandal. It was the beginning of criminal charges. The fabricated diary, the false alibi, the entire performance of 1987 was about to be dragged back into court, this time under the far harsher scrutiny of a criminal trial. But for a brief, fragile moment in 1999, Jeffrey Archer had seemed on the edge of yet another reinvention. Disgraced MP turned best-selling author turned mayor of London. And as you let that image settle, the campaign posters, the rally speeches, the mugs on desks, you can almost feel the irony pressing down. The man who once promised to clean up London ES politics was about to face the dirtiest trial of his life. The year is 1999, and you're standing in a Britain buzzing with change. Tony Blair's Labour government is reshaping the political landscape, but the Conservatives are hunting for a way back, a chance to win hearts in London, the city where image matters as much as policy. And into this atmosphere strides Jeffrey Archer. Imagine him then, silver hair immaculate, tailored suit sharp, confidence radiating. He isn't just a novelist or a peer of the realm, he's the chosen Conservative candidate for the first ever election of a mayor of London. It feels like redemption, a return from the margins of politics. You watch him present himself not as the disgraced MP of the 1970s or the man whispered about in tabloids, but as a rebranded figure ready to lead the capital. But scandal has a way of finding Jeffrey Archer, like a shadow that refuses to loosen its grip. Just as his candidacy gains momentum, whispers begin to build. Old rumors about dishonesty resurface. Journalists sniff around past affairs, past claims, and past contradictions. Then, in November 1999, the blow lands. A newspaper uncovers evidence that Archer lied under oath during his 1987 libel trial. What once looked like a legal triumph now becomes a ticking time bomb. The Conservative Party, already battered after losing power in 1997, panics. To have a mayoral candidate accused of perjury is political poison. William Hague, then party leader, moves swiftly. Within days, Archer is forced to withdraw from the mayoral race. Not long after, the party expels him altogether, the kind of humiliation that no spin doctor can soften. One moment, he is their great hope for London. The next, he is cast out as an embarrassment. You picture Archer leaving headquarters that day, shoulders stiff, jaw set, his public mask still worn even as the press flashbulbs blaze like lightning. Here's the mainstream fact. In November 1999, Archer officially withdrew from the Conservative candidacy for mayor of London after allegations emerged that he had committed perjury in his earlier libel case. By February 2000, he was expelled from the party entirely, a political death sentence. And here's the quirky tidbit. Even in the midst of the scandal, Archer's sense of theater never quite abandoned him. He reportedly told friends that the whole affair was just another chapter, as though public disgrace could be bound, printed, and shelved alongside Cain and Abel. For you, watching this unfold, the scene feels surreal. Archer, who once charmed voters with his underdog narrative, is suddenly the pariah. He is no longer the novelist politician balancing two worlds. He is a man branded a liar, standing alone. Newspapers revel in the downfall, publishing headlines that mix schadenfreude with disbelief. The public, who once queued for his book signings, now watch his political life dissolve. Investigators still question whether the Conservative Party expelled him purely out of principle, or whether they were simply desperate to cut ties before further damage bled into their fragile reputation. Either way, the expulsion is swift, and Archer's political career is effectively over. The man who wanted to lead London is instead forced into exile from the party he had served for decades. The scandal isn't just about one lie, it's about credibility shattered. To lead a city like London, voters expect trust. But Archer's name now evokes courtroom drama, not civic vision. His downfall is a reminder that charisma can win attention, but not always forgiveness. You linger on the image. Jeffrey Archer, expelled from his party, his ambitions in ruins, yet still trying to hold himself upright under the relentless gaze of reporters. In his world, reinvention has always been possible. But at this moment, in 2000, it feels like the curtain has truly fallen. The peer, the novelist, the once rising star is now marked forever by shame. You picture the moment like a stage curtain rising. The year is 2000, and Jeffrey Archer, once a darling of conservative fundraising dinners, now finds himself under a harsher spotlight. Scotland Yard has been quietly investigating the whispers that never quite died after his 1987 libel case. The allegation is stark, that Archer lied under oath, fabricating an alibi to protect himself from the prostitute-related claims that nearly ended his career. And now, investigators believe they have proof. In September 2000, Archer is charged with perjury and perverting the course of justice. The words alone carry a weight that echoes in every courtroom. Not a minor indiscretion, but a direct attack on the very foundation of law. You sit with the irony. The novelist who built worlds from fiction, now accused of weaving falsehoods into sworn testimony. The setting of his trial is iconic. The Old Bailey, London's central criminal court, where some of the most notorious cases in British history have played out. Imagine its imposing facade, the carved stone, the solemn air of centuries of justice. For Archer, it is a theater of reckoning. He walks up its steps, photographers crowding like vultures, journalists shouting questions. Once, those flashes meant celebrity. Now, they are the bright lights of infamy. Mainstream fact. In September 2000, Jeffrey Archer was formally charged with perjury and perverting the course of justice, and his trial at the Old Bailey began in May 2001. The prosecution alleged that he fabricated an alibi during the 1987 libel case, asking a friend to provide false evidence. The trial itself quickly becomes a media circus. Every morning, reporters pack the press benches, eager to capture the downfall of a man who once seemed untouchable. You feel the odd mix of drama and tedium that defines long trials, the endless paper bundles, the careful questions, the heavy silence when evidence lands. For Archer, each detail cuts at the carefully polished narrative he has lived by for decades. And here as the quirky tidbit. Archer reportedly tried to maintain his writer-esque discipline even during the trial. Friends say he would rise early in the morning to scribble ideas for novels before stepping into court, as if fiction could offer a shield against reality. The dual life, author and defendant, became almost surreal. As you sit in that hushed courtroom, you notice how credibility itself becomes the battleground. Witnesses step forward, recounting how Archer had asked them to fabricate stories, how diaries were altered, how a false alibi was constructed brick by brick. The defense tries to cast doubt, to paint the case as a witch hunt against a famous man. But the weight of evidence builds. Investigators still question whether the trial was driven purely by justice or also by a touch of political vengeance, whether Archer's flamboyant persona and sharp elbows in public life made him too tempting a target once cracks appeared. Whatever the deeper motives, the process is relentless. Day after day, you watch him sitting in the dock, expression tightly controlled, pen in hand, scribbling notes that may or may not matter. Outside, the crowds gather. Some heckle, some simply watch, curious to see a once powerful man in chains of procedure. The theater of politics has given way to the theater of law. and the script is no longer his to control. The trial is not yet finished, but the tone is already set. A reckoning is in motion, and no novel twist seems likely to save its protagonist. You find yourself in the Old Bailey on a summer's day in 2001, the air heavy with the anticipation of verdict. For weeks, the courtroom has been a stage where Jeffrey Archer, once peer of the realm and darling of conservative fundraisers, sat under the harsh gaze of 12 jurors. And now, the waiting ends. The clerk reads out the words that slice through his carefully constructed life. Guilty of perjury. Guilty of perverting the course of justice. The impact is immediate. You watch Archer, normally a man of theater, keep his composure. No grand collapse, no shouted protest. Just the tightness of the jaw, the narrowing of the eyes, the silent calculation of a novelist who knows that every detail is being recorded for tomorrow, as headlines. But inside, the fall is seismic. A life built on ambition, charisma, and reinvention is suddenly defined by dishonesty. Mainstream fact. On 19th of July 2001, Jeffrey Archer was convicted at the Old Bailey on 2 counts of perjury and 2 counts of perverting the course of justice. He was sentenced to 4 years in prison. For a former deputy chairman of the Conservative Party and a best-selling novelist, it was one of the most spectacular downfalls in modern British politics. You sit with the surreal irony. Archer, who once raised millions for his party and dined with world leaders, is now measured in terms of cell blocks and visiting hours. The judge calls his offenses calculated, cynical, and contemptuous of the justice system. Each word lands like a nail in a coffin. This isn't merely about lying, it's about undermining the very trust on which courts depend. And then comes the quirky tidbit. During the trial, Archer's diary habits, his obsessive note-taking, were used against him. His own penchant for documenting his life, once a selling point in his prison diaries later, ironically provided evidence that contradicted his sworn testimony. A novelist undone in part by his own pen. Outside, the press erupts. The story leads every bulletin, every front page. The British public, long accustomed to Archer's flamboyance, are fascinated by the fall. Some gloat, some express sadness, others simply shake their heads at the spectacle. The Conservative Party, still reeling from electoral defeat that June, can only watch in dismay as one of its most famous names is led away. You picture Archer walking from the courtroom to the prison van, the flashbulbs exploding, the shouts echoing. For years he had walked red carpets, signed books for adoring fans, waved from podiums. Now, the cameras capture him through barred windows, the door slamming shut behind him. Investigators still question whether the sentence was as much a message to the public as it was a punishment, whether the judiciary sought to make an example of a celebrity who thought himself above the law. 4 years, after all, was a stern sentence by contemporary standards, ensuring the story carried not just personal consequence but symbolic weight. For you, the verdict marks the climax of a long arc. From 1986 tabloid allegations to the libel trial, from political resurrection to mayoral ambitions, Archer has always danced on the edge of risk. But here, in July 2001, there is no escape, no reinvention, no witty anecdote to soften the blow. The novelist-politician has become inmate 5771 at Belmarsh Prison. The Old Bailey empties slowly that day, the murmurs fading into the London evening. You step back into the city's hum, the trial over, but the reverberations just beginning. The guilty verdict isn't just a line in Archer's biography. It is a rupture, a moment when a man who courted fame and power became instead a cautionary tale. And as the doors close on that chapter, you sense the next one waiting in the shadows. Prison life, diaries, and the peculiar resilience of a man who refuses to vanish quietly. The clang of iron doors closes behind you, and suddenly, the world that Jeffrey Archer once knew, Parliament's red benches, glittering book launches, champagne dinners, vanishes. In its place, the grey corridors of Belmarsh Prison, one of Britain's highest security facilities, where Archer begins serving his 4-year sentence in July 2001. You can almost hear the echo of his shoes against concrete, the shuffle of guards, the low murmur of other inmates. It is a landscape as far from Westminster and literary salons as you can imagine. Belmarsh is notorious. Terror suspects, gang leaders, hardened criminals pass through its gates. And now, a life peer, former politician, and best-selling author finds himself among them. The tabloids relish the contrast. Archer, who once claimed to move in the orbit of presidents and prime ministers, now queues for prison food, submits to searches, and learns the grim routines of confinement. For the public, it is schadenfreude in real time. Mainstream fact: Archer served time in several prisons between 2001 and 2003, beginning at HMP Belmarsh, later moving to HMP Wayland and HMP North Sea Camp. He was released on license in July 2003 after serving half of his sentence. And here's the quirky tidbit. In Belmarsh, Archer was assigned to clean toilets as part of his duties. The irony was not lost on either inmates or guards. Britain A.S. most famous novelist scrubbing prison lavatories while papers outside speculated on his fall from grace. Archer himself later recounted the detail with wry detachment, folding it neatly into his narrative of endurance. But prison does not silence him. If anything, it gives him new material. Within weeks, Archer begins scribbling in notebooks, documenting his daily life behind bars. These observations evolve into Prison Diary, a series of published volumes modeled after Dante's Divine Comedy. Each part, hell, purgatory, heaven, maps his journey through different institutions. He writes of the men he meets, the routines, the small indignities and unexpected kindnesses. For readers, it is voyeurism wrapped in literature, a glimpse into the hidden world of incarceration, filtered through the eyes of a celebrity inmate. The diaries provoke mixed reactions. Fans praise the detail and candor. Critics accuse him of romanticizing prison life, of turning punishment into performance. Investigators still question whether the diaries were more crafted than candid, whether Archer, ever the storyteller, exaggerated or reshaped events to suit his narrative arc. But either way, they sold. Once again, Archer converted scandal into story, disgrace into profit. You can imagine the rhythm of his days. Morning roll call, chores, meals, the locked cell at night. Then, in those stolen hours, the scratch of his pen, capturing fragments, an overheard conversation, a guard's gesture, a letter from Mary, his wife, who endured the humiliation with steely loyalty. In those pages, you see a man clinging not only to routine but to relevance. Public opinion divides sharply. Some say prison has humbled him, offering a necessary reckoning. Others sneer that even behind bars, Archer remains privileged, treated with undue leniency. The truth lies somewhere in between. He is both prisoner and celebrity, stripped of freedom, yet never entirely stripped of spotlight. As you walk with him from Belmarsh, yes, stark cells, to the more relaxed environment of North Sea Camp, you sense the narrative shifting. The hardened beginning, fear, humiliation, gives way to softer edges. Semi-open prisons, writing opportunities, a return to comfort. It is still prison, yes, but Archer frames it as a moral pilgrimage, a story with a redemptive arc. The clang of the gates never leaves, though. Even in semi-open conditions, even as he writes and publishes, Archer remains under sentence. The scandal that put him there echoes in every review, every interview, every whispered conversation about his books. And then, in July 2003, after serving half his sentence, Archer steps out a free man. Flashbulbs greet him again, not unlike those that met him at the Old Bailey. He waves, he smiles, he insists that writing sustained him. The world has changed, but Archer's instinct remains the same. Transform experience into narrative, disgrace into marketable copy. Prison has broken many, but for Archer it becomes another chapter, another story to sell, another way to stay in public view. You imagine the scene in July 2003. Jeffrey Archer stepping through the gates, no longer inmate 57071, but a free man again. The cameras, of course, are waiting. They always are. Archer waves, smiles that practiced smile, and declares that he will get back to work. The work, of course, is writing. His lifeline, his redemption, his currency. Politics may have cast him aside, but books will still sell. In the weeks that follow, you see him settle back into civilian life. No more prison chores, no roll calls, no cell doors clanging shut. Instead, a desk, a pen, and a new routine. Archer's prison diaries begin rolling into bookstores almost immediately. The first volume, Hell, charts his early months in Belmarsh. It is candid, bitter, theatrical, and filled with the kind of everyday detail readers devour. Soon after, Purgatory and Heaven follow, tracing his transfer through the prison system. Readers are divided, some fascinated, others accusing him of exploiting his punishment. But sales are strong, proving once again that scandal can be monetized. Mainstream fact: after his release in 2003, Archer published a prison diary in 3 volumes, and by 2010 he returned to fiction with Paths of Glory, which became a Sunday Times bestseller. Later, his Clifton Chronicles series, 2011-2016, sold millions worldwide. And here's the quirky tidbit. While most authors retreat quietly after disgrace, Archer staged elaborate book launches, complete with champagne receptions, as though nothing had happened. One London event even featured him joking about prison food while guests sipped fine wine, an odd blend of gallows humor and high society. But what of politics? This is where the door remains stubbornly closed. The Conservative Party does not welcome him back. His expulsion in 2000 still stands, and leaders prefer to keep distance from a man whose name conjures scandal as much as success. Archer attends some events, makes appearances at Tory fundraisers, but never again holds office or candidacy. His days as a political figure are gone. Investigators still question whether Archer genuinely longed for a return to politics, or whether the distance was a calculated choice, allowing him to avoid fresh scrutiny while basking in literary revival. The truth may be a little of both. Archer thrived on attention, and writing gave him that in spades, without the risk of ballots or parliamentary debates. For you, watching his comeback, the shift feels almost surreal. This man who was once a cautionary tale of political hubris is now again a best-selling novelist. Bookstores pile his latest works high. Readers queue for signed copies, some eager fans, others curious voyeurs drawn to scandal. Archer, ever the showman, delivers speeches, answers questions, tells anecdotes from prison with the same cadence he once reserved for campaign rallies. Yet beneath the gloss, there is an unshakable sense of exile. He remains Lord Archer of Weston-super-Mare, but the House of Lords is not the stage it once was for him. His interventions in politics are rare, his influence marginal. The novelist survives, the politician does not. By the late 2000s, Archer embraces his role fully as a writer. The Clifton Chronicles, sprawling across generations, captivate audiences worldwide. They are not prison diaries, not political memoirs, but sweeping sagas. Fictional, yes, but infused with the drama of a man who has lived through scandal and survival. Readers may not forgive his past, but they cannot resist his storytelling. You pause with the irony. Politics once elevated him, then destroyed him. Writing, by contrast, has been both constant and redemptive, carrying him through disgrace into renewed success. In a way, Archer's greatest political skill has always been narrative, crafting stories, shaping perception, commanding attention, and that, even after prison, remains intact. So you stand at this point in the tale, seeing Jeffrey Archer not as a politician reborn, but as an author reforged. His life in politics is over. His life in books continues. A paradox of downfall and revival, shame and applause, played out not in Westminster, but on the shelves of bookstores across the world. You sit back now, looking over the arc of Jeffrey Archer's extraordinary and turbulent life. It reads less like a biography and more like one of his novels. Ambition, triumph, betrayal, downfall, reinvention. Only here, the plot twists are real, and the consequences, prison, disgrace, redemption through books, cannot be erased by a clever pen. His story lingers as both inspiration and warning. Mainstream fact. Despite the perjury conviction and expulsion from the Conservative Party, Jeffrey Archer remains one of Britain's best-selling authors. His novels, including the Clifton Chronicles, 2011, 2016, and later William Warwick series, sold millions worldwide, translated into dozens of languages. By the 2020s, he had shifted firmly into the literary world, rarely speaking about politics. Yet, scandal is never far. For every glowing review of his novels, there is a reminder of the trial at the Old Bailey, the photographs of him entering Belmarsh Prison, the 4-year sentence that clipped the wings of political ambition. Archer's legacy is inseparable from that fall. Some admire his resilience, the way he turned punishment into prose. Others see cynicism, disgrace spun into bestseller lists. And here's the quirky tidbit. In later years, Archer sometimes auctioned signed copies of his books for charity, and bidders often asked him to inscribe them with cheeky references to his prison diaries. Imagine the paradox. People paying more because the author was also an inmate. Scandal, it seems, had become part of his brand. Investigators still question whether Archer E.'s true legacy lies in his fiction or in his scandal, whether posterity will remember him as a master storyteller or as a cautionary tale of ego and deceit. Perhaps the answer is both. He has become a cultural Rorschach test. To some, proof that reinvention is always possible. To others, a symbol of privilege and hypocrisy. You reflect on how his career bridges two worlds. In politics, Archer's name became synonymous with hubris, the dangers of charisma without accountability. In literature, his storytelling continues to attract readers, many unaware or unconcerned about his past. The duality is striking. The same man who lost everything in the courts still commands loyalty in bookshops. There is also Mary, his wife, who stood by him through trial and prison, her own career in academia undimmed. Their endurance as a couple became, for some observers, the strangest twist of all. A loyalty that defied tabloid ridicule and personal humiliation. For Archer, it provided a kind of ballast, a reminder that not every relationship in his life was transactional. As you drift toward the end of his story, the atmosphere softens. Archer is no longer the young hustler of Oxford, nor the rising star of Westminster, nor the inmate writing diary notes under prison lamps. He is now an elder statesman of literature, still publishing, still selling, but with a past that shadows every line of his Wikipedia page. His scandal cannot be erased. His success cannot be denied. So what is Jeffrey Archer's legacy? Perhaps it is contradiction itself. A life lived in public, constantly judged, constantly rescripted. A man who fell from the heights of politics but built a second empire on the printed page. A cautionary tale, yes, but also a case study in survival. You close the chapter, hearing the echo of cell doors, the buzz of Westminster debates, the rustle of pages at a book signing. Jeffrey Archer's name will forever summon both shame and applause, both scandal and success. And in that paradox, his story continues. Part truth, part performance, part unresolved mystery. And now, as we step away from the courtroom and the clatter of prison gates, let's allow the story to settle. You've walked through Jeffrey Archer's world, his rise in politics, his dramatic fall, his time in Belmarsh, and his return through books. It's a tale that reminds you how fragile reputation can be, how quickly trust can fracture, and how reinvention is both possible and controversial. As you sit with the quiet now, think of the contrast. the gilded halls of Parliament against the grey cells of prison, the roar of applause at book signings against the jeers outside Old Bailey. Archer's life is a meditation on extremes. Perhaps it leaves you with questions more than answers. Do we judge a person by their worst moments, their finest creations, or some uneasy mixture of both? Take a slow breath, let your shoulders soften, and notice the way your thoughts drift like pages turning in the dark. The scandals are behind us, the verdicts delivered, the legacy written in ink and controversy. For tonight, you don't need to solve the paradox. You only need to let the story fade into stillness, like a book closing after a long read. Rest in that calm. Let the weight of politics, scandal, and survival slip away. Tomorrow, there will be more stories, more mysteries, more cautionary tales. But tonight, you can rest knowing you have traced the entire arc of Jeffrey Archer's extraordinary life.